Hello, my name is Esti. I'm an Israeli living in Canada, and I'm a second-generation survivor. My parents were there, their family was there, but I wasn't. One of the first memories I have of my life is being 4 years old at the Seder table at my grandmother's. And I'm standing on a chair, singing the Manishtana with all my heart, as only a 4-year-old can. And everybody around me is crying, and I don't know why. And I felt that maybe I had done something wrong. I didn't know that my voice was like an echo of children that were killed in the war. And I started to feel guilty, perpetually guilty, of the good fortune that I've had all my life and that I've taken for granted. Nobody talked about the Holocaust in my family. So I had to find out on my own in order to try and access the pain of my relatives who were crying around tables, screaming nightmares at night. And the way I did it was to read as much as I could, to watch every single documentary movie I could, to access information from any medium in order to try and touch their pain. I've never been able to touch it, but I've never stopped trying. In 2005, I was studying art at Concordia at Montreal, and I took a class with Professor Robert Murray. And he said, paint, see what you can do. And to my horror, the first painting that I produced in the class was a Holocaust painting. And I was mortified because all I wanted to paint was flowers like everybody else. After 10 such paintings, I figured, okay, this is good enough. I have a body of work. I'm going to do well in the course. But it didn't stop. And I had to resign myself to a process that was much greater than me, much more powerful than me. And after 50 paintings, I all but collapsed because the strain, the emotional, the physical strain were just too much for me to bear. And this is how the Holocaust Suite was born. In fact, it was born within 7 months. It exploded from me. It was as if someone else was holding the paintbrush. I would come and want to paint one thing, but a Holocaust painting would come forth. And it was a way of, I suppose, exorcising my demons. But it gained a life of its own. It turned into something greater than me. It turned into an ahistorical document that speaks about man's inhumanity to man and about our capacity to make a difference in the world and change it for the better. We are the bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. The legacy we leave our children is important because this is the world they will inherit. When I take you on this journey of the Holocaust Suite, I would like you to be mindful not only of the particular historical issues that are depicted in the paintings, but of today. And think, I want you to be engaged. Think, how would you have acted? What would you have done in similar circumstances? Where would you have found yourself then? And relate that to today. Where are you today? What stance are you taking about our world today? And this way, hopefully, we will all harness our energies because we have to, we must, we're obligated to make this world a better place for our children. We begin our journey on the Wannsee Lake near Berlin on the 20th of January 1942. The elite of the Nazi regime had gathered there to decide the fate of 11 million people, even as about 1 million had already been killed by the Einsatzgruppen in Eastern Europe. With meticulous indifference, with absolute efficiency, they designed an industrial killing machine that would annihilate an entire people. The painting here in reds and blacks, and you see a little bit of white, echo the colors of the flag of the Third Reich. And it's in sharp edge to talk about that indifference and about that efficiency. You see the train, and you see a chimney. The trains led to the chimneys where 6 million people perished. turned to dust. 1.5 million of them were children. And the process only stopped because the war stopped. Because the purpose of the war was not Lebensraum. It was not gaining any assets for the German people. It was about killing the Jews. In that 45-minute meeting at Wannsee, the German government found a biological solution to a social political problem. It began with ghettoization. It began with Nuremberg laws. It ended with the final solution. Words are lethal. Words can kill. Once you other a group of people and you deem them not worthy of life, you unleash a process that is inevitably going to result in death. The Germans knew that what they were doing was illegal, was immoral, was unbearable to humanity. So they obfuscated their deeds and they couched them in more comfortable words, like resettlement, like showers, like training for professions, like Arbeit macht frei. And this painting speaks of that euphemistic tendency to change words and to make them more bearable. There is a swastika backwards, a backward swastika, because it was all fake, it was all smoke and mirrors. And the swastika is constructed of train tracks and it's constructed of stairs. Whether you're selected to go right or selected to go left, you are doomed. And the euphemistic words made all that possible, both for the perpetrators and for the efficiency of attacking their victims. Even before the war broke out, Nazi Germany tried to get rid of its Jews in any which way possible. On the 13th of May, 1939, months before the war broke out, a group of 937 Jews had given their worldly possessions in order to take a boat, to buy tickets to go on a boat called the St. Louis, which would presumably lead them to their freedom. And they sailed west. But the free world was barred to them. As you can see, the bars were completely closed, even as they could see through the windows the free world. Canada said none is too many. Roosevelt didn't even listen to their plight, didn't answer their telexes. Cuba only let 22 of them get off the boat. And for a month and a half, the ship of sorrows floundered on the high seas until room was found for it in Europe. And each country said, no, I don't want all of them. I have enough Jews of my own. I'll take 100, I'll take 200. Most of them perished in the end, as they were taken to Belgium, to France, to Holland. Those who went to England survived, but most of the people on the St. Louis died. The Holocaust didn't just kill people. It also annihilated communities. In fact, 7,000 communities were wiped off the map. What does it mean to have a community wiped off the map? It means the blacksmith, the poet, the teacher, the rabbi, the town gossip, and everything that they produced is erased. It's gone. It's as if they've never been there. This painting, it's quite large, comprises actually 2 sections. The bottom part is the coat of many colors, the many colors of all those communities, from Morocco all the way to the steppes of Russia. The top part of the painting depicts the flames that consumed those 7,000 communities and everything that those communities wrote, spoke, and dreamed of. Because I'm a second-generation survivor, the Holocaust is my constant travel companion. It is the lens through which I see life and the world entire. This painting is about the metaphysics of memory. In some crazy way, I'm convinced that I've inherited sights, sounds, smells, and tastes of the Holocaust as if I was actually there. And what I've painted here are the neurons and the cells and the axons of memory, where these inherited memories seem to occupy a real physical space. It is important for us to do well and remember that the forces of evil lost, that the good had won. After the war, there was not a stone left upon a stone in Europe, but out of the detritus of war, the survivors created a new future based mostly on hope and faith in the ability of man to transcend evil. Millions of people, men, women, and children of all ages, died unnamed and unremembered forever. I remember them. They walk with me. I hear them all the time. And I offer them my prayer, my Kaddish. It's a half Kaddish for a half person, people I have never met, but who are definitely in my world. And I hope that the rest of the world will finally develop a prayer book, a special way of commemorating those dead who are so important to who we are and what we've lost. As the shadows of war grew nearer, as the Damoclean sword hung over the Jews were caught like a deer in the headlights. And we ask ourselves, couldn't they see? Didn't they know what was coming? Why didn't they flee? Well, for one thing, there was nowhere to go. No one wanted them. The other thing is what Alan Finkielkraut termed the bad lesson of history. History is a very bad teacher because anything unprecedented cannot be anticipated. The Holocaust was unprecedented in human history. Nobody could fathom something like that had never happened. Today we have 20/20 vision. Then they were blinded by the light. Insouciance is a coping strategy of the disempowered. From Kristallnacht to the Nuremberg laws, the Jews just closed their eyes and preferred not to see what was happening around them. And they kept saying, not us, maybe the Ostjuden, maybe the Jews in the East who look so Jewish, but we're assimilated. We're so German, more German than the Germans themselves. This could never happen to us. And they were sleepwalking. The real tragedy of the war was the indifference of the world. And this, I make a reference to that with this red bird at the left corner of the painting. It's a red cardinal, and I did not choose it lightly. It's a cardinal which depicts, for me visually, the church and the role that it played in the annihilation of the Jewish people. Not one German Nazi was ever excommunicated. The euthanasia program was stopped by the church when they said, "Pass nicht, this is not right to kill the unfit for living," but not when the Jews were living and dying. And then the church helped the Nazis flee after the war when the world knew exactly what they had done. Moreover, the Pope is today canonized and on his way to becoming a saint of the church. It is a scandal. It's an irreparable damage to the actual church, not to us. We have suffered. But the church itself has never come out in condemnation of that active indifference, that passive-aggressive contribution to the annihilation of the Jews. The Germans co-opted industry, the legal system, and culture itself into the annihilation machinery. They swooped on the Jews from all directions. Once again, you see the indifferent red cardinals looking away. This is perhaps the most emotionally wrenching painting in this series. I painted it horizontally with hard paint. And I embedded some iconic images like the little child in the ghetto, the enemy of the Third Reich who's 3 years old or 6 years old, who as a child I was convinced was my father. And then it was like something came over me. And I started drawing like this with these motions, and I was screaming in my studio, why? How? How can people do this? How can they kill this child? How can they rape a woman and leave her on the street and document it in photographs? How? Within days of invasion, the Einsatzgruppen swung into action, and millions fled. Some did not know where to go. Some went into the forests. As a mother, I find it unbelievable, unimaginable how people survive in a forest with their children for years, given that there are wolves in those forests. There were unfriendly partisans. There were SS men charged with killing them and hunting them down. There are unfriendly locals who are collaborating with the Germans. And there's hunger, pervasive hunger. And you have to survive in that environment with your children. It's unfathomable to me. And then you have to do the same thing at -30 in the snow, with the same wolves and partisans and SS bullets flying about. My own grandmother fled through the Alps, 9 months pregnant, with 2 children in tow and no shoes. How did she do it? How did people survive? Growing up, I was one of the luckiest kids in my village. I had 2 grandparents. Who had grandparents? Everybody had died. I had a grandmother and a grandfather, and my grandpa was my friend. He was my buddy, and even when I was 12 and they told me that he's actually my step-grandfather and that my biological grandfather had died in Auschwitz, I already had a relationship with him. He was my Saba, my grandfather. 10 years after he died, I found out that this buddy of mine, this heart soulmate of mine, had lost a wife and 5 children in the Holocaust, and he never told me about it. I never knew that. He never shared that with me, and it hurts to this day. The youngest of his 5 children was named Dobush. He was 5 years old. He was put on a cattle train, on this swastika train, and he was branded with a yellow star, and he was taken to the fire, and he was smoked within days. They killed a boy that's mine, and nobody told me about him. This is an ache that cannot go away. The killing of Dobush raised a very important question for me. What is wrong with the wiring of the human species? How is it that for 30 millennia we've been killing each other? How is it that in the 20th century alone, 260 million people were massacred, killed, maimed, tortured, and suffered genocide? How is it that even today, as we speak, 30,000 children will die of starvation and preventable disease in Africa alone? How is it that under our watch, other genocides are taking place, such as in Darfur, such as in the southern Sudan? You look back at cave paintings from 30,000 years ago, and people are killing people for Lebensraum, for believing in the wrong God. What is wrong with us that we cannot learn from our fathers and their fathers before them that those lethal actions are fruitless, that they lead nowhere, that we don't grow with them, but we die? We are all made of fractal geometry patterns. You take one of us out and the entire edifice falls out. It collapses. Why is it that we cannot feel that differences are immaterial? Why is it that we cannot feel a real brotherhood of humanity? This is actually a pretty large painting. It's 8 feet long. And what I wanted to depict here is the human scale of the death machine. I wanted to capture the kinetic energy of those soldiers screaming through their helmets and their teeth, and the legs marching up and down like Marcel Duchamp's Woman Descending the Stairs. And actually, if you turn it upside down, you can almost see that movement, that staccato movement of knives. Everything is sharp. Everything is knife-like. Everything is full of hatred, Because as they marched into cities after cities, town after town in Europe, they brought in darkness behind them and left rivers of blood. They were motivated by this tremendous hatred in their loins to kill Jews. And that's why I drew those almost pretend stars of David in their loins. And they felt proud of their deeds. They're wearing medals and they're screaming their hatred. They're screaming their Horst Wessel song as they come in to do their deed. As I sit in synagogue or at a concert or at a movie house, I'm always counting. I'm counting rows of people. And I try to figure how many of them fit into a cattle car. I always do that. And I try to imagine what it must have been like to have been robbed of your name, to become faceless, to have no identity in this world, and to be crammed for days into a cattle car that left you standing like this, all squished against every other passenger in that cart, not knowing where you're going, in the darkness, with no food, with no water, and with the population through whose territory you're traveling, indifferent to your cries of horror. I try to imagine what it must have been like, and it's a nightmare even in my imagination. 86 trains left Drancy, which is near Paris, for Auschwitz, each with a cargo of 1,000 human beings. My own grandfather, Moritz Leib Mayer, was a gifted man beyond measure. He was a member of the French resistance in Marseille at the time, and he was captured by Klaus Barbie and his henchmen, tortured from January to September. And on September 1943, he was put on Convoy 59. We know this because the records exist, because they were so efficient and meticulous and so industrial that every man's name, every child's name was recorded for order. Ordnung muss sein. I took one page of the archival material about Convoy 59 and I took it to Concordia, to my classroom. And I asked people to take a charcoal and write on a completely blank canvas one name haphazardly selected from the list that I had in my hand. And people lined up, not only in my classroom, in other classrooms at Concordia. Jews and Christians and Arabs and Muslims and Hindus, everybody wanted to take part in this once I explained what it was. And why was it important? I think that if we say the names of the dead out loud, they're a little bit less dead. They remain here with us. And I needed to find a way to connect with my grandfather. I needed to hold his hand for one moment, as if time folded in on itself, and I could reach him. And why handwriting? Because each person has their own distinctive handwriting. Now, the strangest things happened with that painting. First, when we finished the painting, and I wrote my grandfather's name, I was sobbing. I had my children also write names from the randomly selected list, and they did, and we were all crying. In 2007, the Holocaust Suite was shown in Israel, and a man came to me in Givatayim, and he said, "My name is Maxime Librati. I live in Paris." And I was on that convoy. I was there. And he told me the events of what transpired with that convoy, how the Germans took out an entire cart full of people and shot them because someone decided to try and run away. And then a few months later, I was in an absorption center giving a lecture to newcomers to Israel. And a diminutive girl from France came over to me and said, "Can I see that painting again?" And I showed it to her, and she pointed to a name, Zembul. And she said, "That was my grandfather." It was as if I really did make them a little bit less dead, and they did come to life. Henry Ox here at the bottom was 6 months old. He never had a handwriting, but thanks to this painting, he has a voice, and his voice will carry to posterity, I hope. In Nordhausen, in Dora, in Mauthausen, the instrument of murder was hard labor designed to kill. People in Dora survived 6 weeks, not longer. There was no food, there were dogs barking at them, whips, bullets flying. On Himmler's birthday, for instance, in Mauthausen, 1,000 prisoners were thrown into a 40-meter abyss to celebrate his birthday. It was his birthday gift from Bachmeier, the commandant of Mauthausen. In Mauthausen, the stone quarry had 186 stairs that led from the bottom of the quarry to the top, and from there another 1.5 miles to the actual camp where the marble was stored on its way to Vienna to beautify its streets. The Austrian government issued a stamp of those 186 steps, awash with blood of all the prisoners. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to dignify the actual labor of those human beings who suffered there. They were made to carry slabs of marble on their back with special devices that were designed to carry up to 45 kilograms of stone. And they had to rush on wooden clogs up those steps in order to reach the camp and provide the camp master, Bachmeier, with the valuable stone. I wanted to dignify the indomitability of the human spirit, to show that these people survived by the will to survive alone. They worked thinking that their labor will offer them a way out, a way to survive. And that is what I wanted to dignify. Not their death, but their struggle to survive, to live, to go through yet another day and carry yet another stone, and despite all odds, to survive. One of the gravest crimes against humanity which the Nazis perpetrated was the commodification of human beings, turning them into industrial raw material. One of the 49 camps that comprised Auschwitz was called Camp Canada. And this is where those iconic piles of shoes and spectacles, toothbrushes, and dolls were to be found. They were all shipped to Germany for the enrichment of the Third Reich and for use as industrial raw material. Hair was the epitome of that crime. So what I did is I went to my barber. As you can see, I have very short hair. And I asked him to collect hair droppings from the floor. He thought I was completely insane. But what I did is I painted 36 squares that look like camps, like Camp Canada did. And in each one, I piled a pile of human hair, real human hair. And I put them as if they're on trains, destined to the Third Reich, destined to Germany, destined to be made into blankets and socks and mattress stuffings, full of human hair. This painting painted itself. I don't know where it came from. It started out blank and it turned into Babi Yar. A full 4 months before the Wannsee conference, 33,771 human beings were shot to death, one bullet, one person, point blank in Kiev. 33,771. That single one at the end blows my mind. I can't get over it. They actually counted them. This is the greatest single-day massacre in human history. It took actually 2 days to kill 33,771 people in shifts of 6 hours. They were made to lie on the ground, and the soldiers from the Einsatzgruppen shot them like that. And to top it all off, once the bodies were dead and on the ground, they were covered with sand, and children from Kiev, from collaborationist families were made to run over that sand to pack down the bodies. What impact does that leave on those children? And what impact the loss of 33,771 people on this world? This is a painting depicting the viewer in the camp looking outside through the barbed wire. And the topic of this painting is the stellar apathy of the universe. As people were dying, as my grandfather was turned to ashes, as Dobush was murdered, people had weddings and birthdays, and they were raising crops right at the gates, right near the fences of the camp. Theater flourished. People went to cafes. And the earth didn't stand still. The sun rose and set with maddening regularity. The moon, the stars, nothing stopped. The universe proceeded on its maddening course. Weapons of mass destruction come in many guises. One of the most evil ones is hunger. Hunger is a weapon of mass destruction. And I'm not talking about the hunger that strikes me at 3 o'clock when I open the fridge and I'll eat anything in it because I'm starving. No, I'm talking about starvation that cuts to the very core of a human being, that makes a father take the last piece of bread from his dying child. The hunger that turns people into beasts because they are so maddened by this. It is a weapon that is still used today, but was used to perfection, if we may speak so, in the camps. This is the painting that started it all. That's where it all began for me. When I painted it, I saw something that the eye could not see. I just knew what it was. Like Paul Klee said, that is the role of art, to make visible that which the eye cannot see. And what I saw here was a Muslim. A Muslim in the patois of the camps was the name given to human beings who were so starved, so traumatized by the horror, that they had lost their ability to think, speak, or act as other human beings. They'd lost their voice. And they were called Muslim because they normally fell on their faces in a typical stance that the Muslims use when they're praying. It wasn't against Muslims. It was just a descriptive name given to those human beings. They were disposed of without the benefit of gas. They were thrown into the pits along with babies, truckloads of babies, dumped into the fiery pits because they had no value. What I painted here was a person with no expression and with the wings of death. He is half dead and half alive, and he is on that intersection between life and death. He is a Muslim. And when I saw him, I knew that I was starting a journey that I couldn't control and that I was not the master of. I had to obey. I had no choice. Reveille in the camp was brutal. It was schnell, it was raus, it was getting thousands of people to jump out of their beds, so-called beds, bunks, and to run to be counted, with a few minutes left to find their humanity again and wash. The only serenity in the camp, in the mornings were 5 o'clock, 3 o'clock sometimes, was the reserve of the dead. They had to be counted, lest one of them had escaped at night, but they were the only ones who saw the sunrise in the morning. When you burn 400 people to ashes, you get a pile of ashes about this big. That's 400 people, give or take. What happens when you make a pile of ashes of 1.5 million children? How big a pile is 6 million people? How big a pile is 60 million people? It would be seen from space. It would be bigger than the pyramids. So the Nazis knew that they had to hide this. I mean, what do you do with all these ashes? So they dumped it into the Wisla, into rivers. They put it into mortar used to build houses and roads. And when I walk in Europe, when I visit, I feel those names and those numbers hovering in the air around me. I hear voices. When I walk on the streets, I feel blood oozing between my toes, like after the rain on grass. When we went to Strasbourg once with my family, all I could think of was the concentration camp nearby where 17,000 people were killed through medical experiments and hard labor, starvation and deprivation. So what I did is I took washi paper, it's very, very thin Japanese paper, and I stamped it with blue numbers, like the number tattooed on people's arms. And I put it around this pile of ashes. The pile is made of charcoal, because that's what they turned human beings into. And at the bottom are the nameless, faceless victims about to be turned into ashes. This is a painting called "The Sky Was Empty," because people often ask, as I did, where was God? How did He let this happen? Why did we suffer thus? Why do people still suffer? There are no answers to that. I discovered this through years and years of searching. The only answer is the lessons that we can draw from this unfathomable tragedy. And what we have been given by God is a new set of commandments by default. He didn't step out of the mountain and give them to us. This is something we had to discover inside ourselves, because we can, must, and should change the world given what we experienced. And those commandments are, first, do not oppress, ever, because you've been oppressed. Do not victimize or discriminate. Do not other people because of their color, their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their size, or any other reason. Do not be silent in the face of injustice. Speak up, always, anytime. Be a light unto the nations means shine a light on injustice. Speak out against oppression and discrimination wherever you are, because part of God's work must be done by human beings. When I was growing up, I thought that had I been there, I would have been Chana Senesh. I would have been a partisan fighting, throwing grenades, doing whatever I could to kill Nazis wherever I was. The minute I was in the delivery room, giving birth to my firstborn, my life changed. All of a sudden I knew that had I been there, I would have been in the cattle car, holding my baby, on my way to the gas chamber. As a mother, I would have been useless to the Third Reich, and my son would have been useless to the Third Reich, and they would have killed him outright. It changed me entirely. As my two boys were growing up, I kept measuring them. Now that they're 6'2", I'm okay. But before that, are they tall enough? Will they pass? Are they safe? Will they be able to do the work assigned to them? What would happen to them if I go left and they go right? And what if it's the reverse? What I painted here was the anguish of a mother, any mother wherever she is, all over the world, be she in Rwanda, or my grandmother during the Holocaust, or all the countless women who died and held their dying babies in their arms and screamed their anguish to the world. The world should have shattered, but it didn't. It remains intact, despite that unheard cry that touches my heart every time I see it. All I could do in order to inject myself into that environment, physically feel that I'm there, was strip down, paint my entire body, and lie on the canvas in this position, saying, had I been there, what would have happened to me? Indeed, there but for the grace of God go I. I was born after. But what if? This is a painting in black, red, and white. Again, the colors of the Third Reich. executed almost entirely with bits of mirror. The aim is to engage you, the viewer, so that you can see your own image refracted in the painting. Therefore, it is always different. It is called Bystanders because I want the viewer to start thinking, how would you have acted had you been a victim? What type of victim would you have been? Had you been a perpetrator? Had you been an accomplice in some other way? And not only that, what are you doing today? For under our watch, right now, children are dying of hunger. 250 million children in our world today are slaves. Some of them are soldiers, some of them make chocolate and footballs. Untold thousands are sold into sexual slavery. What are we doing about them? We are the bystanders now. Will we be the righteous among the nations? Will time judge us kindly for our complicity? What are we doing to stop these inequalities and iniquities and evil that's being perpetrated in our world today? In Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, Theresienstadt, there were choirs and there were orchestras in the service of evil. They played the saddest music in the world. They knew who they were playing for, and they were playing to save their own lives. It didn't work for everyone. Not everyone survived, but the tales of their music has survived. What I painted here is a visual depiction of that happy music that they're painting. And I painted their sad faces because it is the saddest music. And I put holes in their instrument because it is an imperfect music that comes from a broken heart. An oubliette is an underground prison cell designed to remove from the populace those people whom the powers that be deem undesirable, and to remove them from memory. What you see exists, what you don't see doesn't exist. From the Nuremberg laws to the ghettos, Jews were removed from society. They were removed from their professions, from parks, from restaurants. They were forgotten. And then they were ghettoized, and again, you didn't see them on the street, so you didn't think about them. It was much easier, more efficient to put them on trains then and to put them in camps because they were out of sight and out of mind. They were stuck in a huge European oubliette that turned them into human maggots, into something not human, not visible to the naked eye. But that is not where the story ends, because even today we have oubliettes that we allow to exist. We allow governments to take prisoners and put them in prisons with no assistance, with no name. Nobody knows where they are. We have those sex slaves being traded like commodities. We have children slaves. We cannot allow oubliettes to exist under this world. We have to shine a light on them. And we have to stop this, because from a Nuremberg law, you go to an Auschwitz. From keeping people out of sight, you can go to lethality. And that we cannot allow, not on my watch. Try to scratch cement. It'll probably tear your nails out. But if you go to the gas chambers, you will see they scratch the walls. From the Inquisition, to the witch trials, to the pogroms, to the camps, the fires were consuming human flesh relentlessly. And I ask, when will it end? When will the fires end? Francisco Goya painted the ravages of war in the 19th century during the Spanish Civil War. And he has become an icon of all anti-war art that came since. I've taken one etching that he did, and I took one image out of it, and I took it out of context. And I turned it into a rape scene. Now, rape is not a sexual crime, Rape is a weapon. It's an ethnic weapon. They call it ethnic cleansing, which is a horrible, horrible euphemism. What rape does is it degrades women, but more than that, it degrades the entire ethnic group to which those women belong. And it is used as a weapon of war in our time, much as it was used then. It is still a weapon of war. We have not progressed from our barbarity. We have not been able to outlaw rape as a weapon. It is inconceivable that in Kosovo and Rwanda, in Darfur, it is still perpetrated and the world remains silent. In Auschwitz, between Block 10 and Block 11, there was a beautiful wall, excellent masonry going back to the 16th century. And you still needed to execute people. So they created a wall in front of the masonry to protect it. It was made of wood and all kinds of detritus that was inside the wood. And against that wall, they shot point blank 20,000 people. The wall turned black from blood, from the fire. What used to happen is that prisoners would hold the condemned against the wall and he would be shot. So what I did is I drilled holes in that painting and you could see the wall through them for the bullets that go through. When you read stories about the Holocaust, when you read documents, even when you see films that talk about the Holocaust or show images of the Holocaust, what's missing is the soundtrack of reality. What did it sound like? Well, it sounded like dogs barking because dogs were everywhere. They were in the ghetto, they were on the train track, they were on the train track at the quay, at the station, in the camp, during work, as they were lining up for roll call. They were everywhere. Some of them were trained, like Lord Bachmeyer's dog or Ralph Amon Goth's dog, and countless other dogs, to kill human beings, to tear their flesh. And what happened was that the dog became the god of the war. It was before the dog that human beings had to offer supplication and beg for their lives. The soundtrack and the inhumanity of turning man's best friend into man's worst enemy is this painting. Many infractions in the camp were punishable by death, a new kind of death, hanging. And in those occasions, the entire camp inmate population was made to watch the hanged man for hours, sometimes a whole day. And I think to myself, had I been the sky watching this man hanging, I would have wept. Had I been the sun, I would have covered my face. Had I been an angel, I would have taken him by the hand to go to heaven, as he's already with the wings. But had I been a prisoner, all I would think about is soup, because this man cost me my bowl of soup. And this painting talks about the brutalization of war, because it brutalized not only the perpetrators, but the victims themselves. People hid during the war where the righteous helped them hide, under doorways, in basements, in boxes, in holes in the ground, and they survived. I painted this person green because he's alien, he's otherworldly. He is not of humanity. He is cast aside. He is unable to speak. He is starving, but he will survive. And he will tell the world what had happened. From Eichmann to Demjanjuk, every single Nazi who was brought to justice said, "Ich bin nicht schuldig," I am not guilty. What interests me is that dichotomy, how a man can leave his house in the morning and turn into a beast that consumes human flesh, and in the evening come home, take off his uniform, have a brandy, and put on a new mask of innocence, hug his children, the same age as those children he killed that morning, and say, ich bin nicht schuldig, I was just doing my job. Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, was a necessary instrument for the efficient workings of the death machine. It kept people in the fog about their fate. They didn't know where they were going. They thought they were going to be resettled. They thought they were going to take a shower. They thought Arbeit macht frei. But darkness, night, and fog also did not allow the population outside to see the victims. And this is something we must be mindful of, because our job in this world is to shine a light on iniquity and evil, and not let those blind people who don't know what their fate is go to their doom. We must be the light that shines on them even as they are blind, even as they are walking to their death. In the 19th century, Heinrich Heine predicted, wherever they burn books, they will in the end also burn human beings. And they did. The ecstasy of burning books by Nazi thugs did end in burning human beings a few short years later. What I did here is I took real Hebrew documents, ketubas, marriage contracts, Haggadahs, books of worship, and I literally burnt them in my studio, and then I applied them onto my canvas. And then I took pages out of Jerzy Kosinski's book, The Painted Bird, because I wanted to underscore the fact that human beings, just like that painted bird, were branded to be doomed. If you had a yellow star, your road to death was assured, just as that painted bird was set upon by the flock of its kin, so were the Jews set upon by the flock of humanity, and they had no choice in the matter. When I think of roll call in the camp, which was a daily occurrence, sometimes taking up to 7 hours, I think of a vertical conveyor belt that leads to doom. Nobody had a chance. Nobody could escape it. You were counted. You had to be marched in groups of 5. But at the end of the day, all that waiting resulted in falling into the maw of hell. Of the 3,000 human beings shoved into a typical gas chamber in Auschwitz, for example, no one came out to tell us what it felt like, what it was like to die in the darkness by that Cyclone B. I painted this painting entirely in powder, because Cyclone B was in powder form. And I tried to depict the feeling of a gas chamber. Now, with 3,000 writhing bodies, you would think that death came amidst the chaos and the cries. But in the end, every single human being dies alone in the darkness with the gas. When Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to human beings, did he think in his wildest imaginings that human beings would be burning in that same fire? Every day, every night, in every camp, in every ghetto, on every street in Europe, the inexhaustible product of the Nazi war machine were dead human beings. What I painted here is an island with a road to oblivion and aliens carrying a human body, because those human beings were removed from society. They were aliens. They were not worthy of the name human being. But once dead, their bodies retained their humanity, and they were the byproduct of this war. Once again, every day, every night, in every camp, in every ghetto, on every street, people did not go to their death without resistance. They went to their death in Kovno, in Vilna, in Warsaw, in Auschwitz, in Bergen-Belsen, defiant. They were singing the Hatikva, they were reciting the Shema, they were stealing weapons where they could, they promoted resistance on every level. They did not go like sheep to the slaughter. And what I want us to remember is not their sorrow. Yes, we have to remember it, we have to carry it. But it's that defiance, that refusal, the utter refusal to submit to such horror that I want us to take with us henceforth. Hatred is malignant. We must not, despite all the horror, have hatred in our hearts for anybody. We cannot and must not be the sum total of our sorrows. We have to be, we must be, the sum total of our hopes and dreams. Even as they were standing on the smoldering ashes of Europe, the first order of business for survivors was to marry and to have children. Even in DP camps, that is the first order of business. And out of the sorrow, they crafted a new world filled with hope and faith in the future. After 2,000 years of relentless persecution, after 300 camps, after 6 million dead, the survivors, with nothing but the shirts on their back and their burning desire to reach sovereignty and statehood, went to the promised land. We started this journey with a train track, and we're ending it with another. Only this time, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. 3 years, just 3 years after Auschwitz, a state of Israel was born. And not just a country. This is a paragon of democracy in a sea of cruel regimes. This is a country with a thriving economy, with a marvel of history of renewing the Hebrew language. Millions of refugees from all over the world found homes in Israel and made it a thriving culture, a real miracle of the human mind, of the human desire to transcend evil. I am so proud to be a daughter to such a nation, to be part of this greatest miracle of human history, and I thank you very much.